The number that they did on Saturday, listen to this, Stugotz. Bigger, obviously, than the Emmys, than the Golden Globes, almost by double, okay? But also bigger than 11 of the 15 nights of the Olympics on NBC. Bigger than as big as the Sunday Masters. As big as the NFL Draft. Bigger than the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. Bigger than any last year for Thursday Night Football. Bigger than the 2021 NBA Finals. Bigger than the finale of Last of Us. Bigger than all of the All-Star games. All of them. Bigger than Heat Celtics Game 7, Eastern Conference Finals. Bigger than Notre Dame USC. Bigger than Alabama against Texas A&M in primetime. Bigger than Alabama LSU. Bigger than the Big 12, Pac-12, ACC title games. That's batshit crazy, Mike. That's crazy, the revenue stream that just popped up from those shitty locker rooms during the pandemic.
First of all, why are you trying to harsh my mellow, man? I'm excited about UConn, and you just start chanting stats about how big the women's tournament was. UConn didn't win the women's tournament. I don't want to talk about the women's tournament. I want to talk about the UConn men. But fine, we'll talk about it.
Now, an elaborate distraction technique to not get you to talk about the UConn men.
Wash my milk.
Here's what it shows. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and arguably Kim Mulkey were the biggest stars in either tournament this year. Those were the three people that people were talking about. Next year, Caitlin Clark comes back. UConn gets AZ Fudd back, who missed the whole year with an injury, and Paige Becker's back, who missed the whole year with an injury for the second time. There will be South Carolina and Dawn Staley trying to get back to glory and probably our number one seed preseason. There's going to be a bunch of really good storylines in the women's game. Stugotz is right. They should sell it separately. It's a huge tournament now. People care. When there are stars, people care. It doesn't matter what the sport is. That tournament this year had narratives and storylines that were better than any of the men's narratives and storylines because the men's tournament wasn't that great. There weren't that many good narratives. So the women's tournament had more ratings. It's not rocket science. Like, stuff gets watched on TV when, especially tournaments, 6-game tournaments, build and build and build, and people get invested in the players and in the personalities. So if that happens again next year, I'm sure the women will outrate the men again. It's not complicated.
It does make you wonder, Mike, if the audience has always been there. They just needed a platform, just needed to be on ABC.
And coverage and support.
Right.
And
parity. They needed parity because the reason that UConn won 11 titles. They haven't won since 2016. So they haven't been that team in a while. The days of Dan Taurasi and Sue Bird and all those folks are not gone. They're still great every year, but it's been a while. And the problem in the old days, and by that I mean 95 to 2011, was no one was challenging them. You need a dynasty, and then you need the dynasty to get knocked off. And that's why the Notre Dame game against UConn with the buzzer beater in the corner was like the biggest game to that point, because it was like people like David beat Goliath. That was what was so exciting about it. And now what you have with what Dawn Staley's done in South Carolina and what Notre Dame has done in the last 10 years or so, and now these teams like Iowa, Caitlin Clark, 10 years ago, Caitlin Clark had two choices: go to Tennessee or go to UConn. Now, Caitlin Clark doesn't do that. Angel Reese doesn't do that. These players don't have to go to one of those 2 or 3 schools because there's more parity. So the storylines in women's basketball at the college level are much better they have a much brighter future, I would say, the next 10 years than men's basketball.
I happened to be at Hobby Airport in Houston during the women's final, and the crowd around those TVs watching that game, I was stunned. I would have associated with Duke, Kansas men's game or something. And I'm wondering, Mike, do you think that's an outlier because a lot of people didn't particularly love the men's Final Four, or is this sustainable? Is this the beginning of equity in college basketball?
It's sustainable depending on the players and the personalities. I don't think it's more complicated than that. If the women's tournament next year has a bunch of sort of middling games, I mean, look at the men's final was a 5 and a 4?
Yeah.
Playing each other.
Yeah.
And, UConn was the best team in the country for most of the year. They had a bad month. They had a bad January. But for the rest of it, they were the best team in the country for the most part. But no one pays attention to the regular season. People only pay attention to the tournament. And so I think to me, it's year to year. team to team, personalities to personalities. If they're exciting and interesting and cool, men or women, people get swept up in it. People got swept up in Caitlin Clark for, by the way, partly because she shoots like Steph and partly because she's a trash talker. And that was exciting. And then they got invested in the idea of, okay, can LSU come out of nowhere and knock her off? And not like she was essentially a heel for the whole year. That's what people forgot conveniently in the Keith Olbermans and the whoever's of the world forgot that this was a wrestling heel getting defeated. But that's exciting. That's cool. Like that's why this game was fun. That's why the tournament was fun this year on the women's side, more so than on the men's side, is because the people involved captivated the audience. So I think it's just year to year, if you get those personalities. And by the way, I think that people like Angel Reese, that entire LSU team, Caitlin Clark, a long time ago, Diana Taurasi was the first person I remember being that person of like, she talks shit the way that athletes do. And it became fun to root against her. Or if you're from Connecticut like me and Carl Ravitch, you root for her. That's just what makes sports fun, regardless of gender or what year it is or whatever. So I think it's entirely dependent on whether people step into those roles.
You mentioned the personalities, and I think that the women's college basketball game is so well positioned because via NIL, they're actually going to make more money in college than they would if they go to the pros. So you'll have these people burst onto the scene and be storylines. I don't know how much more eligibility Caitlin Clark has. Does she have like 2 more years? She's going to be hanging around this sport being awesome. And being her star is only going to grow. So I'm really excited about what NIL has afforded this sport because it is absolutely having a moment. I had a similar experience to Greg. I was in a sports bar, and for the first time in my life, all the TVs were tuned in to a women's sporting event, and the sound was on, and people were living and dying with the game, and it was great to see. It's fantastic.
It's a great point because wasn't Angel Reese the #1 NIL athlete, I think? At least in the women's game.
Yeah,
I think one of the top ones overall. And like it's a great point though, because also NIL means they don't have to check their personalities at the door anymore.
No.
They're not worried about like, am I good? Am I okay? Do I need to like sort of make myself small and presentable and try to get into the next, get into the WNBA or whatever? Like they don't have to worry anymore. They are freed up to just live their best lives on the court and be exactly the kind of people they want to be, and that's what makes it exciting.
Lends itself more to parity too, because you don't have to go to these legacy programs anymore. The Cavender twins did so much for their own marketing and value by just moving from Fresno to Miami. Just being around this media market did so much for their brand. You don't have just the 2 choices that Mike alluded to earlier.
Mike, you mentioned Oberman, and I just wanted the liberal racism of the White House. I remember a friend of mine, when he saw that Trump had someone on The Apprentice, a black friend of mine, and the black guy clearly won. And Trump was like, nah, tie between the black guy and the white guy. My friend was like, I'm out on Trump, man. I saw what just happened there. The White House inviting both teams to that. I know Joe Biden means well.
Well, they didn't invite him yet. They suggested they would invite him. But it was Joe Biden.
But I mean, I know she means well, but I don't think she's paying attention to you can't give the white team the participation trophy there when the black team wins.
Yeah, that was a well-intentioned mistake, I believe. It was a mistake, let's be clear. But like, she was thinking, I would imagine, like, what an incredible event. She was looking at the same numbers you were looking at and looking at the fact that the nation was captivated for the first time as a whole by a women's college basketball final and thinking, like, let's celebrate the whole thing. What she wasn't, Dr. Jill was not looking into or thinking about, to her detriment, was the optics of, like, hey, a team of largely black players just defeated a team of largely white players. Let's invite them all. Everybody in the pot.
You think she's inviting LSU if they lose? I mean,
well, that's actually a good question.
It is
And
a
my,
good question.
I would venture to guess she would have. That's what I mean by it was a well-intentioned mistake. It was,
Let's
but it
invite
was
them.
certainly a mistake, and I think it will be reversed and corrected.
See you later, Mike. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right.